The snow was falling so thick it swallowed sound, turning the mountain road into a narrow white tunnel where even fear felt muted. She walked with her head down, one hand gripping the small cloth bundle pressed to her chest, the other tucked beneath her shawl, already numb. Every step hurt. Not the sharp kind of pain, but the slow burning ache that settles in when you know stopping means never starting again. People had told her she wouldn't survive this winter. A young widow had no place in the high country. No husband, no land, no protection. But she kept walking anyway because turning back meant something worse than death. She heard the horse before she saw it. A heavy sound. Slow. Careful. The kind of movement made by someone who knew these mountains the way others knew city streets. She stopped, not because she wanted to, but because her legs would not listen anymore. The horse appeared through the snow like something carved from the storm itself, dark and solid, steam rising from its nostrils. The man riding it looked just as carved. Broad shoulders under a weather-beaten coat. Beard dusted white. Eyes sharp and steady, the kind that noticed everything and judged little. He reined in when he saw her standing there, a lone figure on a road no one used this time of year. He did not speak right away. He had learned long ago that sudden words could scare people more than silence. He took her in slowly. The thin shawl. The worn boots soaked through. The way she stood straight even while shaking. Pride, he thought. Or stubbornness. Sometimes they looked the same. "You'll freeze," he said at last, his voice low, almost rough from disuse. "Take my coat." He swung down before she could answer, already shrugging out of the heavy wool that had clearly seen many winters. He stepped toward her and held it out. She did not reach for it. Instead, she lifted her chin just a little and shook her head. "I can't," she said. Her voice was calm, but it took effort to keep it steady. "You need it." He frowned, not in anger but confusion. Most people didn't refuse help in the snow. Especially not women alone. Especially not widows, though he didn't know that part yet. "You won't make it another mile," he said. "I've buried folks stronger than you along this road." Her eyes met his then. Dark, tired, unafraid. "Then I'll die warm with my pride," she said softly. Not wrapped in charity. Something shifted inside him at that moment. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was recognition. He had heard that tone before. In his own voice years ago before the mountains took everything else from him. "You're bleeding," he said, nodding toward her hand. She looked down, surprised as if she hadn't noticed. The cloth bundle was stained red where the fabric had rubbed her skin raw. She adjusted her grip without comment. "What's in the bundle?" he asked. "My husband's Bible," she answered. "And his name." She paused. "What's left of it?" That was when the mountain man fell in love with her, though he wouldn't have named it then. He would have called it concern. Or respect. Or simply the need to see her safe. But love often begins as something quieter, something that grows while you're not watching. "My name's Elias Boone," he said after a moment. "Folks call me Boone. I've got a cabin about 2 miles east. You'll come with me." She didn't move. "I'm not asking to be saved." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm offering." The wind howled harder then, as if the mountain itself was tired of watching them argue. She swayed, just slightly, and Boone reached out on instinct, steadying her elbow. She stiffened but did not pull away. "Just until the storm passes," he said. "You can leave after." She studied him like she was measuring a risk she had already taken too many times. Men had promised safety before. Promised work. Promised fairness. Those promises had buried her husband and chased her out of town with whispers and blame she never earned. Finally she nodded once. One night. He helped her onto the horse, careful not to touch more than necessary. He walked beside them through the snow, coat draped over her shoulders despite her protest, his own shirt already crusting with ice. The cabin sat tucked into the trees, small but solid, smoke curling from the chimney. Boone built it himself after the town ran him off for a crime he didn't commit. They never asked for the truth. Just needed someone to blame when fear came knocking. He had learned then how fast community could turn into a mob. Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of pine and iron. Boone stoked the fire while she stood near the door, unsure where she was allowed to be. He noticed and set a chair by the hearth without saying anything. She lowered herself slowly, hands trembling now that the walking was done. Boone knelt and poured hot water into a tin cup, crushing dried herbs between his fingers. "Drink," he said. "Slow." She obeyed and some of the color returned to her face. "My name is Clara," she said quietly. "Clara Whitmore." "Was," he corrected gently. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes." They sat in silence, the kind that felt earned rather than awkward. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing. You shouldn't be on that road, Boone said eventually. Not alone. I was run out, she answered. They said my husband's death was my fault. That I brought bad luck. That I asked too many questions. What questions? She hesitated. Who stole the mine records? Who changed the weight logs? Who signed my husband's name after he was already dead? Boone's jaw tightened. He knew that mine. Knew the men who ran it. Knew the kind of justice they believed in. That road leads to nowhere, he said. It leads away, she replied. That was enough. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Boone watched her hands as she warmed them, scarred and red, hands that had worked hard and been blamed harder. You can stay longer, he said. If you want. There's work here. It's not much, but it's honest. She looked at him, then really looked. At the scar along his neck. The careful way he kept his distance. The sadness he didn't try to hide. And what do you want in return? She asked. Nothing, he said. That's the trouble. Folks don't trust that. She almost smiled. That night, while the storm buried the mountain, Boone lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about a woman who refused his coat. He thought about how the world punished people who stood tall when they were supposed to bow. He thought about how he had been punished too. By morning, the snow had stopped. Clara stood at the door with her bundle, ready to leave just as she promised. You don't owe me, Boone said. I know, she answered. That's why this matters. She stepped into the white world, smaller now against the vastness of the mountain, but not weaker. Boone watched her go, something aching in his chest. He did not know yet that danger was already moving toward them both. He did not know the men from the mine had followed her trail. He did not know that justice, slow and heavy as snowfall, was finally beginning to fall. But he knew one thing with sudden, frightening clarity. If the mountain took her, it would have to take him too. The men came just after noon, their voices carrying before their boots did, sharp and careless against the quiet of the mountain. Boone was splitting wood when he heard them, laughter cutting through the trees like a blade. He froze, axe halfway down, because he knew that sound. Men who laughed like that were never bringing good news. He set the axe aside slowly and stepped out from the woodpile, his eyes already scanning the treeline, the road, the snow for signs of trouble. That was when he saw the tracks. Fresh. Too many boots. Too close to the cabin. His chest tightened, not for himself, but for the woman walking away into the white with nothing but pride and a Bible wrapped in cloth. He mounted his horse without hesitation and followed the trail hard, heart pounding with a fear he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He found them near the bend where the road narrowed, where the mountain pressed in close like it wanted to listen. Clara stood facing three men, her shoulders squared, her bundle held tight. One of them had grabbed her arm. She did not cry out. She did not beg. I told you, she was saying, her voice steady despite the hand bruising her skin. I don't know anything more. The man holding her laughed. Your husband knew. Which means you know. And we're tired of asking nice. Boone didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He rode straight into them, horse snorting, presence sudden and heavy as a landslide. Let her go, he said, voice calm and low, the way it gets right before violence. The men turned, surprised, then sneering when they recognized him. Well, I'll be damned, one said. The mountain ghost himself. Thought you were smarter than this, Boone? Boone dismounted slowly, putting himself between them and Clara without touching her, without even looking back. You've got no claim on her, he said. And no business on this road. The man tightened his grip on Clara's arm. We've got business wherever we want, he said. And she's coming with us. Boone moved then. Fast. The kind of fast that comes from years of surviving without witnesses. He struck the man's wrist, hard, precise. Clara stumbled back as Boone grabbed her elbow and pulled her behind him. The other two rushed him. Snow exploded under boots and fists. Boone took a hit to the jaw that rang his skull, but he stayed upright. He always did. He fought like someone who knew pain but refused to be owned by it. When it was over, one man lay groaning in the snow, another bleeding from the nose, the third scrambling to his feet with murder in his eyes. This isn't over, he spat. Boone wiped blood from his mouth. It is if you're smart. They left, dragging their wounded pride with them, but Boone knew better than to believe in clean endings. He turned to Clara. She was shaking now, the storm inside her finally breaking free. They followed me, she said. I didn't mean to bring this to you. Boone shook his head. You didn't bring it, he said. It was already coming. Back at the cabin, Boone cleaned her bruised arm while she stared into the fire. Her strength had not broken, but it had bent, and that mattered. They killed my husband, she said suddenly. Not with their hands. With lies. He found proof they were stealing from the mine, cheating the workers. He was going to take it to the sheriff. Her voice hardened. The sheriff was already paid. Boone nodded slowly. Same men framed me, he said. Said I burned a supply shed. Truth is, I saw them moving ledgers the night it burned. I spoke up. They needed a criminal. Clara looked at him then, eyes wide not with fear but with something like hope. You know, she said. I know, he answered. Silence stretched between them, heavy but alive. They won't stop, she said. Boone leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams he had cut with his own hands. No, he agreed. They won't. That night, Boone made a choice he had avoided for years. He saddled his horse and rode into town with Clara at his side, not hidden, not running. Faces turned. Whispers followed. The same people who had crossed the street to avoid him now stared openly. Boone dismounted in front of the sheriff's office and tied his horse with steady hands. You don't belong here, the sheriff said when Boone stepped inside. Boone set the mine records Clara had protected on the desk. Neither do lies, he replied. The room filled. Miners. Wives. Men who had lost pay, lost brothers, lost years. Clara spoke then, her voice clear, carrying truth like a blade sharpened by grief. She told them everything. Names. Dates. Proof. The sheriff's face drained of color. The men from the mountain tried to run. They didn't get far. Justice didn't come gentle. It never does when it's been delayed too long. By dusk, the truth stood where lies once did. Boone walked out of town with Clara as the sun dipped low, the weight on his chest lighter than it had been in years. They returned to the cabin, to the quiet, to the fire. Weeks passed. Winter softened. Clara stayed. Not because she owed him, but because she chose to. She worked beside him. Laughed softly. He watched her heal, watched her pride turn into peace without losing its edge. One evening, as snow fell gentle instead of cruel, Boone handed her his coat again. She took it this time. Their fingers brushed. I didn't take it before, she said, because I didn't want to be saved. Boone met her eyes. And now? She smiled, small and real. Now I know the difference between charity and standing together. The mountain stood silent witness as two wronged souls built something honest from what the world tried to break. And for the first time, Boone believed that love, like justice, could survive even the coldest storms. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in small, careful ways, like it wasn't sure it would be welcomed. Snow pulled back inch by inch from the trees. Water began to whisper beneath the ice. The mountain breathed easier. Boone noticed these things because Clara noticed them. She had a way of seeing life return where others only saw what had been lost. Each morning she stepped outside the cabin, wrapped in his coat now worn without apology, and looked at the sky like it was something that might answer her if she waited long enough. Boone watched her from the doorway, pretending to busy his hands with work he didn't need to do, afraid that if he spoke too soon he might break whatever fragile peace had settled between them. The town did not forget quickly. Justice had come, but forgiveness lagged behind like a wounded animal. Some folks nodded at Boone now. Others still looked away. Clara felt it too, the quiet weighing of her presence, the way women studied her strength and men measured Boone's claim without words. She held her head high through it all. She had learned the cost of lowering it. Boone admired that about her, admired how she never sharpened her pride into a weapon, never dulled it into submission either. She simply carried it, steady as breath. One afternoon, a wagon climbed the road toward the cabin. Boone tensed at the sound, hand drifting instinctively toward the rifle by the door. Old habits didn't die easily. Clara noticed and touched his arm. Let's see who it is, she said. The wagon stopped and an older miner stepped down, hat in hand. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. We're rebuilding the schoolhouse, he said. Could use help. Both of you. If you're willing. Boone studied the man's face for mockery, for trap. Found none. Just effort. Clara answered before he could. We'll come, she said. Boone looked at her, surprised. She smiled softly. The mountain taught us how to survive, she said. The town needs to learn how to live again. They worked side by side in town, hands raw by evening, hearts heavier than they admitted. Children watched Clara with curiosity that slowly turned into trust. Women brought bread, then conversation. Boone spoke little, but when he did, men listened. Not because they feared him anymore, but because they knew what it meant to stand alone and come back clean. One night, walking home under a sky stitched with stars, Clara stopped. Do you ever regret staying? She asked. Boone thought about it. About the years of silence, the cold, the anger he'd fed like a fire just to stay warm. I regret who I was while I waited, he said honestly. Not where I ended up. She took his hand then, simple and sure, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Danger did not vanish. It never truly does. One of the mine men escaped before trial. Whispers reached Boone of threats, of revenge promised from the lowlands. Boone prepared quietly. He checked locks, cleared sight lines, taught Clara how to handle a rifle, not because he expected her to fight, but because dignity included knowledge. She learned fast, jaw set, eyes calm. I don't want violence, she said. Neither do I, Boone replied. But wanting doesn't stop it. The man came one night, drunk on rage and failure. He did not make it past the outer clearing. Boone confronted him under the moon, words offered once, refused once. The fight was short, final. Boone stood afterward shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of ending something that had chased him for years. Clara held him when he returned, said nothing, understood everything. Summer found them planting a small garden. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Boone built an extra room onto the cabin. He never said why. He didn't have to. One evening, Clara set her husband's Bible on the shelf beside Boone's few worn books. His name doesn't end here, she said. Boone nodded. Neither does yours. When Boone finally spoke the words he'd been carrying, he did it simply. No kneeling. No speeches. Just truth. I don't want to save you, he said. I want to walk with you. If you'll have me. Clara answered without hesitation. I already am. They married quietly before winter returned. No crowd. Just witnesses who mattered. The mountain watched again, silent and vast. Clara wore his coat as she always had. Boone smiled because love had never been about taking that coat away. It had been about offering it and waiting until the moment she chose to accept it. In a land that had taken so much, two people built something that stayed. And that was justice enough. Winter returned the way it always did, quietly at first, like it was testing whether it would be allowed to stay. Boone noticed the cold before it settled deep, the way the wind shifted and the birds moved lower. Clara noticed it in different ways. In the way the mornings felt heavier. In the way memories crept closer when nights grew longer. Marriage had not erased her past. It had given it a place to rest. Some evenings she sat by the fire holding the Bible, not opening it, just feeling its weight. Boone never asked her to stop. Love, he had learned, was not about fixing what pain had already shaped. It was about making room for it without letting it rule. The town came up the mountain more often now. Sometimes for work, sometimes just to talk. Boone and Clara were no longer rumors. They were neighbors. Still, not everyone approved. A few women whispered that Clara had risen too fast for a widow. A few men muttered that Boone had been rewarded when he should have stayed punished. Clara heard it. Boone saw it. Neither answered it. The mountain had taught them that dignity was quiet, and it lasted longer than noise. One afternoon, a young boy arrived alone, breathless and scared. His father had been hurt in the mine. The new owners were refusing to pay for a doctor. Boone didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse. Clara grabbed her shawl. They rode hard, snow cutting their faces raw. Boone carried the man out himself, ignoring the shouting, ignoring the threats. Clara stood her ground when the foreman tried to block the way. You already took enough from this mountain, she said, voice steady as stone. You won't take him too. People watched. Then people followed. That was how change moved now. Not fast. Not clean. But forward. The injured man lived. Word spread. Boone was no longer just the mountain man who survived exile. Clara was no longer just the widow who refused charity. Together they became something harder to dismiss. Proof. The sheriff changed. The mine rules changed. Slowly. Painfully. But they changed. One night, long after the fire burned low, Clara woke from a dream shaking. Boone pulled her close, grounding her with his warmth. They were laughing, she whispered. Like before. Boone rested his forehead against hers. They can't touch you now, he said. Not here. She nodded, believing him not because he promised safety, but because he had already stood in its place. Years passed. The cabin grew worn in good ways. Scratches from furniture moved, not from fear. Laughter lived in the walls. Children came sometimes, borrowed from town, eager to learn the mountain trails from Boone and the quiet strength from Clara. She taught them to read by the fire. She taught them that pride did not mean standing alone. It meant knowing when to stand together. On a cold evening much like the first, snow falling thick and silent, Boone found Clara outside staring down the road. You cold? He asked. She shook her head. Just remembering, she said. If you hadn't stopped that day, Boone interrupted gently, you would have survived, he said. You always were. She smiled, turning toward him, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. Yes, she said. But I wouldn't have lived like this. They stood there as the mountain watched, two lives once pushed aside now rooted deep. Love had not come to them loudly. It had come in small, stubborn choices. In refusal. In rescue. In justice that arrived late but stayed. And in the quiet understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is accept warmth without losing who they are. The mountain aged them gently. Lines came to Boone's face from sun and wind, not bitterness. Clara's hair picked up threads of silver, not from sorrow but from years honestly lived. Seasons moved through the cabin like familiar guests, each one leaving something behind. By then people no longer whispered when they rode into town together. They waved. They stopped to talk. They asked advice. The same place that once pushed them out now leaned on them quietly, like it always had but never admitted. One autumn, a stranger arrived with papers and polished boots that did not belong on dirt roads. He carried news from the state. The mine was being sold again. This time under oversight. Records reviewed. Wages protected. The man spoke of Boone and Clara's names like they were already part of local history. Clara listened politely, but afterward she sat by the fire longer than usual. Boone knew what weighed on her before she spoke it. They remember now, she said. But they didn't when it mattered. Boone poked the fire once. Memory is a slow thing, he said. But it's better than silence. She nodded, accepting that truth without letting it soften the past. That winter sickness came through the low valley. Boone and Clara opened their door without discussion. One by one neighbors arrived, frightened and tired. Clara boiled water and herbs the way she had learned from women long gone. Boone chopped wood until his hands split. No one asked why they helped. No one questioned their place. Crisis has a way of stripping life down to what actually matters. Late one night, when the worst had passed, Clara sat beside Boone on the cabin step, wrapped in the same coat he had offered her years before. Snow drifted slow and gentle. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. Boone smiled faintly. "Every time winter starts," he said. "I think about how close the world came to missing you." Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "And I think about how close I came to refusing a future because I was afraid it would cost me my dignity." Boone kissed her hair. "You didn't lose it," he said. "You taught me what it looked like." In spring they planted trees where old scars still marked the land. They did not erase the past. They honored it by building around it. Children ran between the new saplings. Laughter carried farther than it used to. When Boone walked the mountain trails alone now, it wasn't to escape. It was to return. On the anniversary of her husband's death, Clara placed the Bible back in its cloth and walked with Boone to the ridge. She said his name aloud, steady and unafraid. Boone stood beside her, silent witness, never threatened by a love that had come before him. When she finished, she exhaled like someone setting down a heavy load. "I'm ready," she said. Boone didn't ask for what. He understood. As years turned, stories began to travel beyond the mountain. Folks spoke of a widow who refused charity but accepted partnership. Of a man cast out who chose justice over revenge. Of a place where dignity survived cold and cruelty alike. Boone and Clara never corrected the stories. They knew truth didn't need polishing. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the snow gold, Clara took Boone's hand and squeezed it once, the same way she had on the road long ago, only warmer now. "Thank you," she said. Boone raised an eyebrow. "For what?" She smiled. "For offering the coat," she said. "And for waiting." Boone laughed softly. "I would have waited a lifetime," he said. The mountain stood as it always had, vast and unmoved, but something had changed all the same. Two people who once walked alone now stood rooted together. And in that quiet strength, the storm finally lost its power. Time has a way of softening even the hardest ground if something living keeps pressing its roots down. Boone and Clara grew old in the cabin without ever growing small. Their steps slowed, but their presence filled every room, every trail, every quiet moment the mountain offered. Boone's hands shook some mornings not from fear anymore, but from years of work honestly done. Clara's eyes stayed sharp, still able to read truth in a person's face faster than words ever could. People came to them now not just for help, but for understanding. When disputes rose, when anger threatened to undo what had been rebuilt, someone always said, "Ask Boone," or "See what Clara thinks." They never raised their voices. They never needed to. The weight of what they had survived spoke for them. One winter, heavier than the others, Boone fell ill. The cold settled into his lungs like it had been waiting its turn. Clara stayed by his side day and night, feeding the fire, holding his hand, speaking to him even when he slept. The town sent food, sent doctors, sent prayers that once would have been withheld. Boone opened his eyes one evening as snow pressed hard against the windows. "You never did like taking help?" he whispered with a faint smile. Clara squeezed his hand. "I learned the difference," she said. "And so did they." Boone lived through that winter, but something shifted after. He walked less, sat more, watched the mountain instead of moving through it. He was not afraid. He had faced worse than endings. On a clear spring morning, he asked Clara to walk with him to the ridge one last time. They went slowly. He leaned on her, and she did not pretend not to notice. At the top, they sat where the world opened wide. Boone breathed deep. "I was angry once," he said. "I thought the mountain was punishment." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "And now?" she asked. Boone smiled, tired but full. "Now I know it was shelter." He died quietly weeks later in his own bed, with Clara holding his hand and the fire burning steady. The town came up the mountain in silence, hats in hands, eyes lowered with respect that came too late for some, but not too late for meaning. Clara stood tall through her grief, not hard, not broken. She had learned that love did not end when breath did. It stayed like the mountain itself. Years later, when children asked her why she still wore that old coat, she would smile and say, "Because it reminds me that dignity doesn't mean standing alone forever." When Clara was laid to rest beside Boone, the mountain stood witness once more. Snow fell soft that day, not cruel, not sharp. Just enough to cover the ground without hiding it. And those who told their story never spoke first of romance or rescue. They spoke of a woman who refused charity but accepted partnership, and a man who offered warmth without demanding ownership. In a world that tried to break them, they chose to stand, and in doing so, they taught an entire place how to be human again. Long after the cabin stood empty, long after the fire went cold for the last time, the mountain still remembered them. Wind moved through the pines the way it always had, but those who knew listened closer, as if something gentle traveled with it. The trail past the old cabin never fully disappeared. Snow covered it each winter, and spring always found it again, pressed back into the earth by feet that still chose to walk there. People told the story quietly now. Not like a legend meant to impress, but like a truth meant to be carried. Parents told it to children when pride felt heavy and fear felt louder. They spoke of a young widow who would not take a coat because she would not trade her dignity for survival. They spoke of a mountain man who learned that love was not rescue but patience. In telling it, people remembered how close they had once come to losing both. The town changed in small ways that lasted. Doors opened faster to strangers. Questions were asked before blame. When winter came hard, no one walked alone if it could be helped. And when someone stood proud in the cold, help was offered gently, without strings, without shame. The cabin was never rebuilt after it finally fell. No one wanted to replace it. It became a marker instead, a place people paused, hats off, voices lowered. Wildflowers grew there in the warmer months, stubborn and bright against the stone. Some said it was just the soil. Others knew better. The mountain remained what it had always been, cold, honest, unforgiving to those who demanded, generous to those who respected it. And somewhere in that vast quiet, the choice made on a snowy road still echoed. A refusal. An offer. Two lives meeting not in weakness but in strength. That was how love stayed. Not loud. Not owning. Just present. And that was enough.